There's the problem. Check, check. Oh, we should have sound now. Please tell me. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Deanna. Let me know if the sound's coming through. This is the way I learn. Slowly and cumbersomely, bumbling along. I think we've got the sound fixed, so hopefully that's handled. Please let me know if you can hear me now, or if
There's
not.
the problem.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Check,
And now
check.
my tab's nice and loud. There we go. We got that fixed. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for that little notification. Now I can say welcome to the Ontological Leadership monthly series. Thanks, everyone, for the tech support. This month we've been talking a little bit about theory versus practice, especially in the field of leadership. That's what we're going to talk about today. I've got a bunch of different things I'll take us through. My notes should be closer to the camera so it doesn't look like I'm staring off at something more interesting than my own face. I'm going to create a clearing in which the most enjoyable thing you can do is look at me and listen to me talk. So I have to be willing to do that too. So I got to bring the notes closer to me so I can also look at me and listen to me talk. We're going to talk about this distinction, knowing how to versus choosing to. I'll talk a little bit about the process of learning, how we move from intellectually understanding something and what we could call sympathy to wisdom and empathy through the process of experience. We'll talk about failure in practice versus failure in theory, putting our thumb on the scale, creating confidence. Boy, I wrote these topic titles out, but I'm not exactly sure what each of these are. So we'll see how this goes. And then we're going to finish up by talking a little bit about how to shift into the realm of practice. So how do you actually make this step across the threshold of your fear into the state where you're actually practicing what it is that you want to create in your life? I'll come up with some approaches. I'll speak to some structures and things you can do. Hey, Louise, nice to see you. A couple things for intro. If you don't already check it out, you should check out my podcast if you like this kind of content and it's a hassle to show up once a month. I put out a weekly shorter form episode on some part of ontological leadership each week. And then in addition, usually midway through the week, we have the audio transcripts from these conversations put into the podcast too. So you can find that by going and searching for the transformational leader, Adam Quiney, on the internet, and you'll find it there. So that's something to check out if you haven't already. And you should subscribe to my newsletter if you don't already, if you enjoy my writing along these sort of topics. And really, all I'm trying to do is discern leadership, break down the obviously intuitive things that we all know about leadership, and then get to why they don't work. Because it's great if we're all spouting leadership advice, if that leadership advice is getting us to where we want to go. But if what that advice is doing is having us believe we're going to where we want to go while secretly keeping us stuck, that's a huge problem. And we need to be able to discern that. And so that's what that newsletter is about. Louise just saying, I love the podcast. Thank you, Louise. Appreciate that. I want to show you this cool game that I got in the mail from a friend of mine. My friend is Andy Chalef or Chalef. I think Chalef is how you pronounce it. He's got it written here somewhere. It says on the side, oh, come on, focus up, camera. Do your work. Warning, I'll have to read it to you. Highly triggering content. So this is a game that Andy made in partnership with someone, a conflict role play game for cooling fights and rekindling love. And it has a couple blasting. I mean, I imagine if I had a fire extinguisher and I was upset with my wife and I just blasted her in the face with it, I would feel better. She might not. And vice versa would probably be true too. Andy finished a book recently called The Connection Playbook. I'm going to have him on the show to talk about it, and we'll go through this card game. But I wanted to just show you this before we get too far into the show because I think it's really cool. So the idea is that you've got these cards that have sort of like role play things, and each role play has a scenario. Like this one says, spending habits. You and your partner have different perspectives on financial spending habits, which has caused tension in your relationship. Oh dear. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh no. Role play a conversation where you express why their spending habits are challenging for you, focusing on articulating your concerns. And then you've got, what do we have these? A dynamic shifter card, which I believe changes the game. Fast forward 1 year, what would we want to remember about how we handled this? So I don't know exactly how you use that. And then you've got like share one thing your partner does that makes you feel appreciated. So some rewards. And I think at the end, you've got these cards that are evaluation, and you evaluate how did your partner do with this particular thing. This one says, it's hard to see, could be better, somewhat okay, but could be improved. So I love this kind of idea. Sometimes this stuff, especially for people like me that hang out in the realm of the intellect, role playing and these kind of things can feel a bit cheesy. There is so much value in the stuff that people like me find cheesy because it's cheesy is kind of it's cheesy is a story that would have me pull out of the thing, and then by pulling out of the thing I don't have to stay in the thing and confront what the thing is bringing up. And so um, I think these sort of games are really valuable, and they provide a structure in which to practice something. Candida's asking, "What's the name of this?" So it's called "Cool It." Hey, buddy, cool it. I'm really sorry. Oh, there you go. Couples edition. Cool it. Oh, nice. It's zooming in now. A conflict role play game for cooling fights and rekindling love. I don't think this is too expensive. And the book that Andy wrote that, oh, here it goes, designed by Jennifer Coomer, based on Andy Chaleff's The Connection Playbook. So I think Andy's doing a whirlwind tour about his book, possibly, but I'm going to see if we can get him on and chat to him about that, and he can take us through some of it. These sort of things that provide structure, structured conversations, and we'll talk more about structure in a bit, but structure is highly valuable because what we tend to have in relationships are good intentions, a feeling of being unheard, and then we ask for our partner to sit down with us to talk about something. We share our thing. There's no structure for how that conversation goes. And so I share what's going on for me, and my partner immediately gets defensive because they're a human being. And because I'm sharing hurt, and their partner is sharing how they've hurt their partner, so they're going to, of course, feel defensive. So I share, they get defensive, they defend themselves. I'm left not feeling heard. That part of me that needed to share to be heard feels even less seen. Now I escalate, and then nothing works. And so this is super common. And any process that brings a little bit of structure to support you kind of stepping through things a little more cleanly will at first feel restrictive and probably dumb. And then as time goes on, you will find it to be a godsend. So we'll talk more about that later. I just wanted to show those cards and flip through them a little bit with you. I have to remember to move away from the microphone as I drink so you don't have to hear a large slurp. That's very good hosting of me. Okay, so I want to start by taking off my headphones and grabbing a book and coming right back. So that's what I'm going to do. I am back. I have said book. This book is called Straight Line Leadership, and the author is Dusan Jukic. This is a fantastic book that's like impossible to find. You can download it for free from his website, Straight Line. I think it's called Straight Line Coach. But what I love about this book is it's just entirely a set of distinctions. So you probably can't. I'm going to read you some of these chapter titles, but like pleasing versus serving, a created world versus a reported on world, a dream versus a project, worry versus concern, shoulds versus musts. So there's a lot of distinctions are really good because they allow us to kind of take what we're looking at and really get clear. Is it this or is it that? Hey, Sean, nice to see you there. And so I want to read by way of beginning this conversation on theory versus practice. I want to try to find this one, here it is, chapter. I'm going to read just a little bit from it. Here we go. In our straight line coaching work over the years, we have found that there's one distinction, one shift inside the mind that's more profound than any other. This better be good. This shift, when people make it, when they see it, when they can really see it clearly, allows them to participate in a future that offers a much higher level of performance. I'm going to skip ahead. In order to see this distinction clearly, let's start with where people need to shift. Where are they stuck? What keeps them from achieving what they want to achieve? What's the mindset? Where does the mind need to shift? Here's the answer. It needs to shift from knowing as an inner stance. There's a big problem with this stance of knowing. It's the idea that I need to know something before I can take action. And here's how it shows up. Quote, I don't know how to do this, end quote. Or, quote, I don't know what to do. I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it, quote. And finally, it also shows up as, quote, I would like to reach out and connect with people and let them know about my service, but I don't know who to call. So those are three ways this dysfunction shows up. And he goes on to say, we're just about done here. Let's start with, I don't know how to. People say, I would do that, but I don't know how to. I would make these calls, but I don't know how to make cold calls in a graceful way. I would reach out and find people who would have an interest in my service or product, but I don't know how to find them. I would patent my inventions, but I don't know how. I don't know how. I don't know how. He says, well, there's no longer any truth in that, because if you simply go on Google and type in how to and fill in the blank, you'll get so many articles and interviews and advices, all of which can be useful that you could get into action right away. Finally, he says, if there is sufficient and specific information which you really need, your stance of choosing to instead of how to will provide it. A powerful choose to will cure ignorance and an inadequate skill set every time. You can find out how to do anything. The how to is never really what's missing. The choosing to is what's missing. Take that, Mike. So, thank you. Candida's put the link to the book below. Thank you so much for that, Candida. Duchan's an interesting character. I've had a few conversations with him. He's a bit like a freight train. I find some of his opinions and stuff on things don't really align with my own, but the book is phenomenal. I love it. And so this idea of needing to know how to versus choosing to is such a crucial distinction and so relevant for our topic today, this idea of theory versus practice. So let's talk about the process of learning. There's this interesting experiment called the marshmallow experiment, where you give people a bunch of marshmallows and spaghetti, and like cold spaghetti, and maybe some string. I think you get a bit of string, and then you're invited to build the tallest marshmallow tower you can. And they give this to, like, they've run experiments where they give it to a whole bunch of different classifications of people: engineers, CEOs, lawyers, doctors, children, whatever. And the children tend to score the highest. They tend to do, I should say that the aim is to build the highest tower based out of these basic building blocks you have. And what they found is that children tend to be the ones that do the best. CEOs and managers tend to do the worst, which we all like. Take that, CEO. Who do you think you are? Children tend to do the best because they're willing to make mistakes, and they will try something until it falls to pieces, and they will try the next thing. Whereas as we age, we become more and more attached to the process or the path that we set ourselves off on. And that makes it challenging for us to tear things down and to start anew. And what I take from this sort of thing is that children really know how to learn a lot better than we do. And as time goes on, we become afraid of the process of learning. And the way learning works is I always think the best example is riding a bike. So to ride a bike, you need to understand some basics. You need to understand roughly the idea is to go fast enough that you won't fall over. You need to understand that the way you go fast is by pedaling. That's how you get your momentum. And you need to understand if you turn your handlebars that way, your bike's going to go that way, and vice versa. If you turn your handlebars the other way, the bike's going to go the other way. That's mostly all we need to know. And then everything after that is a willingness to get on the bike and be in the practice of riding the bike. And that's the scary part. We are afraid of doing that because we'll fall off the bike. And I don't know if any of you remember your experience, but mine was a lot like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, where I'd get on the bike would knock, I'd fall off, but in my mind, the bike would kick me off, and then I'd hurl the bike down the ravine. Then I'd have to go back and get it again. I'd get so frustrated. I wouldn't want to get back on it, but I would get back on it. And then eventually over time, I would get better and better and better. There's a couple things happening as we're in this process, and a couple things that occur as we ossify, as we age and harden, and our bones and our mental processes become harder, more rigid. A few pieces of nuance get added to it. So one, each time you get back on the bike, you're actually learning a little bit more. You learn, oh, if I turn the handlebars that way at that speed, I'm going to fly over the handlebars. If I try to go really slow, I'm this, whatever. You're learning each step along the way. And there's no shortcut for those milestones. Someone might learn to ride a bike faster than you, and we might create like a bunch of, oh, they had this Charles Atlas super special technique that allowed them to ride the bike faster than I did. And if only I got that from my kid, then my kid could learn to ride the bike faster. But by and large, it's a matter of getting on the bike and practicing and being willing to go through the discomfort of falling off the bike. What happens as we start to age, if we use this as a metaphor for our process of learning, is that falling off the bike, we add significance to it. And this is where things go awry. The significance we add is not just I fell off the bike, it's I fell off the bike, I failed at my task, and that means, here's the significance, I am doing things wrong. Things aren't working the way they should. Things won't work out for me. I'm just going to be someone who never falls off or never learns how to ride a bike. I'm too old to learn how to ride a bike, and then we can just keep adding all of this stuff to it. And what happens is that significance wears on us. It's like burden that we're stuck with. And the significance makes us guarded against falling off the bike a second, third, fourth, fifth time. Because every time we fall off now, we're adding to that layer of significance. And adding to that layer of significance means, fuck, I'm, pardon my language, I'm never going to make this happen. And so what we try to do is from that significance that we add, we try to avoid or resist it. And this is where we start to go towards theory. I don't want to fall off the bike. One, it hurts. And two, it means something significant and I don't like that meaning. And therefore, how do I avoid that experience? I just want to read what you wrote here, Sean. Sean writes, reminds me of an experiment one of my trainers shared. They had a door with the knob on the wrong side and adults tried and tried but gave up. Kids solved it in minutes. That's so brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many in children, because they haven't yet learned about the significance and they're a little bit more made of rubber. Their falls don't hurt them quite as bad as us. But by and large, the thing is that they haven't learned the significance. They haven't learned that falling off the bike means that they're a failure. They haven't learned that falling off the bike means that they'll never, ever be able to learn how to ride a bike. And because they haven't created that, they haven't learned that if you push on this door and you don't figure it out, you're dumb. They haven't learned that. And so that doesn't clog up their ability to just experiment and to be in the process of learning. So all of this stuff that's available when we're young gets hijacked. And in addition to all of this, we've got some other parts of this process that show up. Like we have a story. This is more significance. We have a story about how long it should take us. And that story is based on fantasy. It's based on my ideal version of me and how long I should take. It's based on how long my friends took to learn how to ride the bike. It's based on what the market default is for riding the bike. It's based on all of this stuff, and none of it matters. What matters is how long it's taking you in the moment. And what's more important than that is there's no right amount of time. It's going to take you exactly as long as it's going to take you. If you were trying to ride a bike and you knew that you would achieve riding a bike in a year's time, even though your story was you should be able to do it in 2 weeks, would it be worth it? Do you want to ride a bike that much? Are you willing to keep practicing? So our significance robs us of this. It makes it very hard. And what that does, sorry, there's one more part I have to put in about learning, our process of learning, which will require some liquid fuel here. What is that other part? Yes. Finally, our improvement's not linear. So you might fall off the bike and be like, I learned something. I'm trying to remind myself that I'm in my process of learning. You get back on the bike and you fall off even sooner. And then you get on a third time and you fall off even sooner. And then the fourth time, you're just walking to the bike, you trip and ram your head into the handlebar because you're a bozo. This is part of the process of learning. It's not a linear trajectory upwards, although we feel it should be. And because of that, again, we attach more significance to our process and we're unwilling to trust ourselves. We're not willing to trust that I'm actually learning because we can't see it in the immediate moment and we get frustrated. Our expectations about how learning should look cloud the experience of just being in it. And so, you know, part of how things unfold for us, part of how the human body and this machine works is that we might practice a bunch of things and then all of that stuff seems to disappear from our skill set for a while. And what's happening is that our body, our system is integrating it. All of those things are kind of falling into place. You can think of it like a brick wall, and each brick represents like, here's part of the technique I know how to do in this situation. And as you're trying to learn and deepen and broaden your skill, you actually have to dismantle that brick wall and rebuild it so that new bricks that you've learned can fit together into the old bricks. And this process where your brick wall gets dismantled, that's where you're tripping on your way to the bike. That's where you're falling off as soon as you got on the bike. And that's where we really have a hard time just being with our own process. We get very disheartened because we're like, I should be further along. So all of this creates in ourselves a bit of an anathema to learning. We don't like the process of learning. We want to hold it off. So we've covered how learning works. Now we can talk about the impact of how we're left. How we're left is, I didn't like that experience. I felt dumb. I felt stupid. I felt X, Y, or Z. Not a fan. And so what we go looking for is something to alleviate this experience that we've just described, this experience of learning, of getting on the bike again and again and again. And where we go looking for that alleviation is in theory. Now we can talk theory. So theory is like all of the stuff we have to understand so that we can do the thing. And as soon as we start to talk along these lines, we get into a little bit of a challenging place because people will defend vigorously the importance of theory, the importance of understanding things. Adam, you don't get it. Like, it's all fine and good to say to get on the bike, but if you're trying to just ride, like if you're trying to pilot a 747, you can't just get in there and bumble around, you'll die. Yes, absolutely. There is 100% theory that is important. I'm not intending in this conversation to discount any of that. The intention here is to draw focus to our bias. And our bias is towards understanding and filling our brain and understanding and thinking about and gaining more insight and so on and so forth. Can anyone else relate to that? Has anyone else found that? Like we always want more insight? And what this does is it supports us from crossing the threshold of our fear. In the realm of theory, we can think about this stuff endlessly. We can always generate new insight, new awareness, new like, oh, isn't it fascinating that I don't do X? Isn't it interesting that the way I'm stopping myself now is by getting frustrated with my neighbor? Huh, I wonder what that's about. I wonder where in my background and my history and how I was raised by my parents, that happened. Huh, I wonder, some people in the chat saying, yup, I can relate to that. Me too. I wonder how my parents were raised that, you know, and you can just continue to go back and back. It turtles all the way down in theory. There's never a point where we have enough of it because what happens is our fear is working to keep us safe. And its version of safety will include some flavor of not having to fall off the bike. Because remember, we create significance around that process. And the significance is that my failure means something specific about me that is bad. I'm dumb. I'm not smart enough. I'll never get there. I'm a failure. I was born broken. Whatever it is, you could dig into that, but that's not really so important. The more important and interesting thing is to notice that there's never enough thought, theory, calculations that I can do that will satisfy that part of me. And this is where we get caught. When we're trying to create breakthroughs for ourselves, we will get lost in the mind. And the process of moving from our theory into the realm of practice, where we're actually taking action, has a razor thin edge. And that razor thin edge is the threshold of our fear. The moment you stop talking about something, the moment we move from knowing how to versus choosing to, we come into confrontation. Confrontation with the part of ourselves that has created all that significance. Confrontation with the part of ourselves that's like, you might be dumb. Confrontation with the part of ourselves that is a very weak muscle in feeling that particular way. And what happens is, as we practice with that, we have to sit with those feelings. We can't really do much about it. For example, if I'm a salesperson, or let's go even sillier. And silly isn't a very fair way to articulate this. But let's imagine I want to date people and I have a story that I'm unattractive. So I can study ridiculous books like Pickup Artists and The Game and all of this stuff. I can learn all the psychology. Or I could go a slightly less incel laden kind of approach, and I could just read about like what makes people attracted to you. What are the traits that make someone attractive? And I could practice in front of the mirror, and I could practice in these really safe ways. I could create role-playing situations, scenarios with my friends where I'm like, sit down with me and I'm going to look off to the side the way that I've learned is coquettish and appreciated by members of the opposite sex or the same sex, depending on where you go. Tell me the impact on you. So what's happening is it kind of occurs a little bit like I'm doing the thing to move me forward, but actually I'm playing inside like a room with padded walls. I'm still hanging out in the realm of theory because I'm not yet really confronting my fear that I will be rejected and that people find me unattractive. I can sit down with my friends all day long and I can do gestures, I can ask whatever, but they're not really what I'm afraid of having myself rejected by. And consequently, all of that stuff still sort of remains in the realm of theory. So this is part of the reason that Seth Godin calls it failure porn. Failure porn is where someone's like, I'm afraid of being rejected. And so someone says at like an event, they're like, great, go out and ask people for free stuff all week long. And then the person goes and is like, I asked for a free coffee at Starbucks and they told me no. Cool. But there's not really much in the way of stakes there because, at least in the example we've just created, getting rejected for a free coffee is not going to trigger that same underlying concern about being unattractive as going out and asking someone you find yourself attracted to go on a date with you. It's not going to trigger the same thing. And so this is that razor's edge of crossing the threshold of your fear. Our ego's job is to keep us in theory, to really keep us practicing in all of these ways that look kind of like real practice, but actually stay in the safety of our theoretical. Dave just saying, let's talk about something silly and say I'm not attractive. He's quoting me there. I love the different ways this statement can show up. It can be bold or be about keeping the fear alive. Yes. One other version of this is that when I started this work, I was always a student of personal development. Ever since I was probably 13, I was reading like Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, all of that stuff. But I was studying it like a scientist, like a theoretician. And I would read all of this stuff and I would read like, Brene Brown or whatever next came out and be like, oh, gotta be vulnerable. And then I would find places to be vulnerable that were totally safe. I would be vulnerable in an invulnerable space, in a place where I knew I could say anything and there was no risk of it blowing back at me, which is different. That's different than really practicing vulnerability. And this is sort of the nature of putting our thumb on the scale. We have a bias that it's very hard for us to see that is going to be our mind's going to get a hold of, hey, what I got to do is practice the scary thing, but it's a bit edgy to do it over here. So let's do it over here in this safe space. And then what it has us doing is sort of practicing in the room, in the green room, before we actually get to the place where things are really going to land, things are really going to make a difference, where we're really going to be confronted by our stuff. So we just have a natural tendency to do this. And my intention in bringing this up is not to dishearten any of us or leave us fucked up or like, fuck, what do we do? It's more just to discern for ourselves, oh, there's a natural bias I have. There's a natural pull that I have, and there's a natural pull that my people are going to have. We're all going to have a pull towards hanging out in the theory. Okay. Making some good time here. So there's a couple parts I want to elaborate on, and then we'll shift to the realm of practice, and then we'll kind of wind down, aiming to make these about 45 minutes long so that we don't eat up too much of our time and that we can be nice and succinct. So once people hear this idea of the bike metaphor, we start to get a flavor of this conversation. We think to ourselves, got it, go out and fail. And that becomes our new thing. And this is sort of like I call this the ontology of failure in theory versus failure in practice. So failure in theory, you can probably, maybe some of you can already hear your minds going on about it. Mine is, it sounds like, oh, got it. I know I know I just need to go and be willing to fail. I know I just need to go out there and do it. I know I just need to blah, 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 blah. Sort of like, I know I just need to turn my handlebars and fly off the side of my bike. But when you get into the moment, it's very, very tough. In theory, failure is easy to understand and it's very rational because we can theoreticize all of this out. We can lay it out and be like, got it. Here's where I am. Here's the loop that I'm caught in. In order to get over there, I have to be willing to confront the thing here. And so I have to step over the threshold of that wall. I know I just need to fail. Why do I need to be afraid? And then we just need to put our head down and do it. Super easy in theory. And what happens is that in practice, it's not easy. In practice, whilst it's simple, which is what makes it feel easy in theory, it's simple in practice, but it's very difficult. It's very challenging because it's so confronting. It's confronting to our safety, to our egoic safety. And consequently, we have a whole ton of resistance show up. And what happens is because it occurs so easy in theory, we start to get frustrated and disappointed with ourselves. I know I don't have anything to worry about. I know that I don't need to be concerned. Why can't I just do this? And then we conclude something must be wrong about ourselves. And so, friends, I want to say nothing is wrong about you or me, specifically me. Nothing's wrong about me. Guys, lay off. It's totally fine. This is just the makeup of every single human being. And it's really sacred and important that it be challenging. Because if it wasn't, we would be doing really, really dumb stuff all the time and dying off. And we wouldn't have evolved as a species to this point in our lives. So when we hold failure in theory, we start to become very irreverent to ourselves. We start to be very almost crass and unkind towards ourselves rather than generous and gracious. And rather than recognize, holy mackerel, this is a big step I'm trying to make. We say things like, I'm just fat and lazy. I just don't care enough. I guess I just don't want it. No, you're just up against your edge. And that is very challenging. Louise writes, in this case, the idea, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this, Louise, so I can speak a little bit more to it. He writes, in that case, the idea of, quote, comfort zone, learning zone, panic zone is too simplistic. Let me take a swing and see if I've got that. I think I understand the gist of what you're saying, which is basically we have our comfort zone, which is the status quo. And I think a better term for comfort zone is probably familiarity zone, but that's totally non-memeable and not quotable. But I think it's more apt to what our comfort zone really is, which is it's the stuff we're familiar with. We know how to handle it, we know how to work with it, we know how to be with it. The reason I like that term more is because your comfort zone might be wildly having your adrenaline spiked. Some people say, like, well, what about for me, dude? This is how they talk in my mind. Dude, what about for me? I live my life on the edge, dog. I'm totally always super uncomfortable. That's where my comfort is. Great. So that's what you're familiar with. How are you sitting at a library just meditating for an hour? Oh, dude, that would suck. That's that. So there's the edge of their comfort zone, right? So our comfort zone is what we're familiar with. This is also incidentally why like people that have been raised abusively can't sit still without sabotaging a relationship that's healthy because it's very wildly uncomfortable for them for a bunch of reasons. Like often it's sort of like if I'm already in a fight, I know the punches are going to come from this direction. Whereas if all's quiet, I could get attacked from any direction. Better to get into the fight because then I know how to defend myself because that's what they learned because that's what they're familiar with. So that's our comfort zone. And then I think what Luis is saying is like we've got a learning zone, which is sort of like the next step. And then if you go a bit too far, you end up in your panic zone. Your panic zone being where you're basically redlining. We could also think of this like going to the gym. Your comfort zone is just lifting the same weights you've always lifted. Nothing new, not going to build any more muscle, but you're not going to lose any either. Your learning zone would be pushing out 5 to 10 pounds or whatever the amount would be. Your panic zone would be trying to lift 6,000 pound weights, lifting the machines, instead of the next step up where you're going to hurt yourself. So I think these concepts are really, really good. Like basically, Luis is talking about a gradient, and that is very important. We want to work with a gradient because often what happens in our learning process is we sabotage ourselves. We make it significant that we fail. We don't like that we're failing. And so eventually we get to this point where we feel very frustrated with ourselves that like, I can't seem to get through this. And largely what happens is we give up because of all that significance and how bad failure feels and what we make it mean, blah, blah, blah. We bail out. So then we show up with all this pent up, ugh, today's the day. It's January 1st, and I'm going to make things different this time. This year, things are going to be different. And then we try to play with those 5,000 pound weights. And then we injure ourselves. We hurt ourselves on some level, ontologically or musculaturely or whatever. And then we pull back and then we rest. And then it takes even longer before we get the next boost of confidence, so on and so forth. I think I'm speaking to what you're talking about, Louise, but let me know if I'm missing the mark. So, let's talk a little bit about creating confidence, which is something a lot of people want. Um, Creating confidence in this place happens as a virtue of you practicing before you feel confident. And there's no way to avoid that. Take a sip here. I, many people I quite like speaking these days. I love public speaking. I'm doing keynotes, stuff like that. I like this format. A lot of people would say, wow, Adam's very confident talking about himself, talking in front of other people. But growing up, if you put me in front of a room of people, my face would go bright red and then I would shake uncontrollably as I spoke. And I hated oral presentations. That was like the worst thing in the world. I would I would lie about being sick so I could avoid the oral presentation, stay in bed, maybe watch TV, probably just read a bunch. And then there'd be Christmas holidays. I didn't have to do the oral presentation. Now it's long in the past. The teacher's forgotten about it. The end. So I hated it. And the way that changed for me was not, it was not theory. It was not learning about a bunch of new approaches or like it wasn't about knowing mentally I could picture people in their underwear. I mean, I could try that. I've never found that works. Too sexy, frankly. Too sexy. Imagine them in burlap sacks, maybe. But the point being, the way that confidence built was by being in the practice of it. And what happens as we practice is that we have to sit in that experience of being flush and shaking. And if we do that, we start to discover that Other people aren't really doing anything. They're just sort of listening to you and appreciating what you have to say while you shake like a moron. And as they don't all get up and walk out of the room, you start to conclude, oh, I guess maybe I can be okay with this. And you start to relax around it a little bit. And each time you practice with that, it gets a little bit easier to be with that thing that's been showing up for you. And then you don't have to hold it under the water. You don't have to hold it at arm's length. And over time, what starts to happen is we stop caring about that thing. We stop worrying about it. And this is how confidence is born. So confidence is born out of a willingness to be clumsily practicing and to simply allow things to unfold as they do. Once you get to that point, what people want is the theory that will make them confident so that they don't have to go through any of that process. We want that big needle in the back of our head that Neo gets in the Matrix that teaches you Kung Fu without having to go through any of the process of like figuring it out. And I would love to do like an ontological matrix. The movie's very ontological anyhow, but like where Neo learns Kung Fu, but then he gets up there and then he's totally freaked out because of some history he has that means that he can't move his body a certain way. A more realistic, less watchable matrix where he learns all the skills, but it doesn't matter at all because he hasn't healed whatever was there that was stopping him from being a Kung Fu master in the first place. That would be a movie directed very nichely towards me. I would like that. Okay, so confidence is a canard. That's your distinction for today. Confidence is a canard. It's a trap. Confidence and the quest for it will have us hang out in theory forever. We got to get out there and practice. And the beautiful thing is that we live in a world that's incredibly abundant. People will insist it's a small, small world, Adam. You don't understand. If I practice and I screw up, I'll be dead. I will no longer get any offers. I won't be able to blah, 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 blah. I'll never again. I disagree. And I think that that's a really disempowering context because it creates a ton of significance. And it's like, how are you going to learn to ride a bike if you've got a story that if you fall down once, you will never succeed? You're in trouble. And so if that's the story you've got, my suggestion would be find a different game to play because that game is going to be very, very, very tough to win at. There's just not much leeway at all. And if you're open to changing that context and, hey, perhaps there's a different way I could look at it, great. Then maybe that game's worth playing. But failure has to be on the table for us. It absolutely has to be on the table for us. So let's talk about how we move this from theory into practice. How do we cross that threshold? What are some structures that support us doing this? Actually, before we go there, this is a super valuable thing to be able to see and discern for your people, your team members. Because as a leader, anytime we set like a nice big goal for someone, they're going to get enmeshed in theory if this is a confronting goal. And we want to be able to start to discern this for them. Like, oh, are they locked into this process of getting more insight and learning more? Yeah, I'm still researching this thing. Yeah, I'm still researching this thing. It can be really helpful to start to recognize when someone else is caught in this building castles in the realm of theory rather than practice. And the best way we can learn to discern that for other people is to get supported to discern it for ourselves. So here are some approaches, some things you can do that will really help you cross that threshold of your fear. Number one is take stuff out of the abstract and put it into the concrete. So whenever people have visions for what they want to create, those visions often are very vague, like I want to be engaged at some point in my life. Okay. When? By when do you want to be engaged? What kind of person do you want to be engaged with? Where do you want to be engaged? The more we take it from the abstract, the wide, diffuse nature of stuff and put it into the concrete, the more it calls us to task. If I say I want to be engaged to a beautiful woman by the end of the year, now I've got some work to do. I can no longer build castles in the realm of the theoretical mind because sooner or later that date is going to arrive and I'm going to have to face the fact like, hey, none of that stuff worked. Or as it comes closer, I'm going to like, I got to get into action. Now, whether or not you actually get into action, that's a different conversation. You might just be very scared to take these steps to move forward. But as soon as you take it from abstract to concrete, you are creating, you are making, you are creating clarity for yourself. It's going to become a lot harder to just sort of hang out in the mind fuzz of the theory because that data is moving forward. So the more we can make things concrete and less abstract, the more potent. So we can do this with our teams. Provide your teams with measures of success, measurable results you want them to deliver on. A lot of leaders say like, hey, I need this thing done. Are you good to make that happen? And the person says yes, but there's no deadline. There's no actual like expectation, no clear agreement about when this will be finished. And what that does is it lets leaders off the hook, feeling like a taskmaster or feeling like they're being pushy or bossy or whatever. But all of those things actually support people. They support you as a leader because you now have an agreement. They support your staff because your staff know what is required of them. And they support the organization because there's something we can rely on now. We can actually work with it. So really practice taking stuff out of the abstract and making it concrete. And if you want a simple practice with this, just go out and notice when you're keeping things diffuse. Just see if you can start to catch yourself doing that at times. And you can look in big places, like you can look organizationally. Where do I set a mandate for my people that's very broad and fluffy? Where do I invite my teams to create something, but I just kind of keep it fuzzy so that they'll figure it out, and then I don't have to hold them to account for what they did or didn't do. You could look down that path, or you could look like, where do I make requests at home? Like, hey, I want to go out for dinner sometime in the next 3 weeks, as opposed to, I want to go out for dinner this Wednesday with you. Will you do it? Or like, hey, I notice I'm asking this person out on a date, but the way I'm doing it is like, hey, maybe it'd be cool to go out sometime perhaps. So let me know if you'd like that. Versus, I want to go out on a date with you. Would you like to do that? Here's when I could go. So don't get caught in the specifics, not about the content. I'm not trying to give you dating advice. But the point here is more to just notice the places where you're keeping stuff diffuse. And if you can start to catch that, now you've got a place that you can start to bring to the more concrete. The second step that can be really helpful is to practice with declarations. So this is kind of a lead on or like an additional part from the first part. A declaration really makes something concrete. And a declarations format is very easy. It is a what by when. I will achieve this, that's the what, by this date, that's the when. You're going to notice a bunch of resistance typically when you're in the practice of creating declarations. So a lot of people will say like, I really want a new job. That's a common, understandable thing. In leadership training, we ask them, great, by when will you have a new job? And they go, well, I don't know. I can't answer that question. It depends on other people, blah, 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 blah. David, my man, I love it. We are very excited to have you come back with us. David's practicing declarations right here. I'm talking about joining the Forge, being on our leadership team. If you don't know David, get to know him. He's a delight. So as soon as I ask you, by when will you have a new job? The whole system starts typically to freak out because like, I don't know. How can I understand? How can I sort that? That feels like a bunch of stuff's out of my control. Yes. And either everything's out of your control or everything's in your control. Like, and it's not so much about control. It's like, if your family was going to die because you didn't get a job in 6 months, would you get a job? Probably, right? I apologize for the grim metaphor, but it's just worth considering. There's a difference about who we're being underneath this. And a declaration pulls you into what we would call an at cause way of being, meaning you are at cause to create the result that you say you want, as opposed to a more at effect way of being. Yeah, I'm going to look for jobs, but I can't really do anything to force it. And I just have to let things happen to me. And hopefully that I meet the right people. Never mind how the universe works and spirit and destiny and all that. If you have two people, one of who is being, I am going to do whatever I have to do to get a new job by 6 months from now. And another person who is being, I hope that things align and I'm going to take some action, but I'm not going to get too worried or stressed out about it and blah, blah, blah. Which of those two people do you think is more likely to create the result they're committed to? It's this person, right? The at cause person. And so a declaration, it calls us to the mat. And that's why we resist it, because it pushes us across the threshold from theory into practice. Now that I've told people I've made this declaration, I got shit to do. I got to get into action. And some of that action is going to be not the sort of action I want to take because it's kind of scary and kind of edgy and kind of pushes me. And so that's the work. We make declarations. And for bonus marks, make declarations publicly. Make them to someone. Tell someone, this is the declaration I'm making. This is what I'm committing to. Now, there's like evidence different ways. Like some research has shown if you publicly declare something, that kind of will create a little bit of I already did a thing, and then you'll pull off on the gas. But personally, I don't find that compelling. Studies, science, whatever. What I notice is when I tell someone, here's what I'm playing for, this is what I'm committed to, it creates an extra little bit of accountability for me. So I think it's a powerful thing to share these declarations. So that's the second thing you can do that'll really help you move out of theory and into practice. And if you notice you get confronted, if you notice you have resistance, good news. That's the experience of moving from theory to practice. So whatever shows up for you as you try to work with that, celebrate it. Try not to get too hard on yourself. Try to be like, hell yeah, I'm doing the hard work. This is really uncomfortable. Oh, no wonder I want to hang out in theory because this is less comfortable. But that's where our life grows. I just want to read what David wrote here. He says, Bay gave you a practice of declaring to have my weeks full of conversations, and it made such a great difference towards building and getting to my 6 figures business. The knowing that I can declare and fulfill on that. Beautiful. So David's just sharing, he's been in this practice of declaring the results he wants to create and then taking action to fulfill on them. That's what powerfully moves our life forward. It's much less in the realm of the mind, it's less sexy. Because when we declare a result and then get into action, it's like, oh, I just have to take action. There's no sexy insight. There's no like, oh my God, I didn't realize that leprechauns and unicorns are the same thing. And now that I know that and realize I'm a Gemini, all I have to do is like look at people the right way and they'll want to work with me. Magic Attractor Excelsior course leadership plus $6,000. Sorry, I got a little lost in a rant there, but there is like this desire for this sexiness of insight and stuff like that. And when we move from theory to practice, it's often decidedly unsexy, but that's why it works. That's why it transforms our lives. And what happens on the other side of that is the sexiest thing in the world, results. Not as sexy as I was hoping it was going to sound, but whatever. Okay, let's go to item number 3. So the third thing we can do to help ourselves cross that threshold is recognizing that our fear won't go away and that all of our attempts to understand, to learn, to develop confidence, to figure this out, all of that stuff is more of our fear. Uh-oh. There we go. We fixed the mic. So our fear will show up and be like, don't do the thing. And then one of the ways it gets us to not do the thing is it's like, instead become fascinated with trying to make me go away. It's sort of like there's this trope in like, I don't know, maybe like Bond movies or something where like the villain shows up and he's like competing with the hero. I'm actually thinking of Michael Scarn from The Office, but the villain's competing with the hero in this event that the hero needs to win to whatever. And the villain's there and he's shooting at the hero and the hero's dodging him and they finish the race and the hero's like, ha, you didn't kill me or whatever. And the villain's like, I wasn't trying to kill you. I just needed to stop you from winning. And then, denouement follows. The point being, your fear doesn't really care if you attack it or if you figure out the way through it or whatever, as long as what you're doing is putting all of your energy into addressing your fear rather than just doing the thing that you're afraid of doing. So fear just gets you locked up into this How do I get past this? Maybe I need more confidence. How do I learn more? All of that is more fear. So the third thing we can do to really move into practice is recognize the fear's not going to go away. It's going to be scary whenever it is that I cross that threshold, and that's okay. And our game becomes uh, committing to acting in partnership with our fear rather than exclusion to our fear. Meaning, okay, I'm going to have a bunch of stories that I'm not yet ready. I'm going to have a bunch of stories that I looked stupid. I'm going to have a bunch of stories that these people don't want me to ask them out. And I'm going to practice anyhow, knowing those stories are going to be there. I'm just going to allow that to be. By the way, knowing this and having this stand, it won't make the fear less scary. It just helps you kind of disconnect from the fear a bit. It helps you sort of have your fear here on your left shoulder and be like, yeah, I hear you, buddy. I'm just going to keep taking action as opposed to having it right here stuck to your face. So that's the third thing. Fourth and final thing you can do is you can embrace structures that support you to get into action. So structures are any kind of system in your life that reminds you, that supports you to push forward and do the thing that's scary. So some simple examples, a reminder on your phone. I use phone reminders all the time. And what I love about Siri these days, with if you're an Apple user, is you can hold down that button and call up Siri and you can say, remind me tomorrow morning to do this. And then tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you'll get a reminder to do that thing. Godsend. If you're the sort of person that's like, Adam, I've got 5,000 reminders. Does anyone here have this? I've got 5,000 reminders on my phone, all going off. That doesn't work. Great. Then that's not the structure. Maybe it's a sticky note on your laptop. Maybe it's you write something in the steam of your mirror when you come out of the shower so that each morning when your mirror steams up, there it is. Maybe it's something you sit down when you do prayer in the morning and like focus on, maybe it is a friend that you reach out to and say, hey, each day, can we text back and forth first thing in the morning? I'm just going to share, this is the thing I'm working on. These are all examples of structure. Calendar appointment. Have your leader at work check in with you. Have an accountability group that you're a part of and tell them, this is what I'm doing. And I want you guys each week to check in with me. Any of these things are structure. And what structure does is it helps us stay concrete in terms of our action, and it keeps putting the thing in front of us. And what our fear wants us to do, and what theory allows for, when there's no real deadline, when there's a vague notion of something happening sometime, what our fear wants to do is just forget about it. Just get busy with the rest of your life, and your life will be plenty busy, especially when you're talking about doing something confronting, crossing that threshold. Life will be plenty busy enough to not do the thing. So structure just keeps it in front of you and it makes it harder to look away from. And what that does is it supports you to actually do something about it. So all of these, just to recap, move from the abstract to the concrete, make declarations, recognize that your fear is not going to go and you're going to have to act in partnership with it, and embrace structures to support you to get into action. Now, I've got some examples of structures beyond this, more powerful ones. The most powerful structure, the one I'm obviously very committed to, is a coach. Working with your coach means every single week you check in, you get to share, here's the stuff I said I was going to do, here's the stuff I said I was going to do that I didn't. And then you get to have a conversation, taking a look at like what's getting in the way, and then go out and take action towards it. So coaching, really, really, really powerful structure to support you to be in action. Other structures, at least in terms of what I offer, are the Forge. That's the program David mentioned in the comments. That's a program that runs from September until May and really supports you to become masterful in this work and move it from the theory into the practice. I want to speak very quickly on that. And then I've got two other last things. One is a new course that I'm putting out. So in the Forge, the first half, we are teaching people the concepts, sort of like we do in this call, to understand how to coach more powerfully, how to lead more powerfully, and how to show up in their life. And then at about the halfway mark, we are largely just having them practice over and over and over again. And for some people at first, they're frustrated because there's too much theory. And then for other people, they're frustrated afterwards because they want more theory, because the practice is less comfortable. And I remember being on a coaching call in one of my early days. I was training coaches and I was talking to one of my clients and she was saying, I keep I keep saying that I'm going to make these calls. I've committed for like a bunch of weeks. For the last like 4 weeks, I'm going to make these calls and I don't. And so, can we really look at my fear? And I really want to break my fear up. And I was like, I mean, it's been 4 weeks. We've talked about this. Does this matter to you? Yeah. We got clear, like, what's important about this? Why does this matter? She said, she had a bunch of really cool reasons. And then I was like, okay, well, here's what I see. Let's get you off the phone and take the action. And she got very quiet. Was like, I don't know. I'm not, and her fear, even in that moment, wanted to hold on to, well, but let's look at more, like maybe we can make my fear go, make this easier. We didn't. And I didn't force her to do anything. I just invited her to take a look and like, hey, is talking about your fear actually moving you closer? Because it seems like it isn't. And she got clear, like, yeah, it's not. I'm going to have to do this thing. Transformed her whole life. Super powerful call. That's not always the thing to do, but it's an example of where like moving from the theory to the practice really can impact us, can be really potent. Okay, last couple of things. The intensive is a place to move out of theory into the practice, entirely based on getting you into the ontological practice of whatever it is you want to do. So if you're interested in that, if that seems compelling, you can learn more about that at evergrowthcoaching.com/the-intensive. I'm just going to put a little, here we type, I'll put that in the old chat room, the-intensive. There we go. That's in the LinkedIn comments if you're following along. If not, you can go find them elsewhere. And then finally, one other structure that I'm putting together right now is I just got a wave of inspiration. About 6 years back, I created a course called the Creating Clients course. This was really about supporting coaches who were trying to sell and hated the world, basically. They hated the world of marketing that they were being inundated with. They hated having to hear about this idea of funnels. They hated selling. They hated all of it with good reason because it's disingenuine and it sucks. And I was like, that's a garbage approach. And really coaching and deep, potent relational work that we're doing is built off of relationships. So let's create a course to help people ontologically understand what do you need to do, what's going on underneath, how can you actually fall in love with this process. I know the description sounds like every other thing that people are peddling. The good news is that course is available for free. If that's something, if you are involved in selling or enrolling people and you would like to have a deeper understanding of that, I stopped selling that course a bunch of years back, but all the video content's available. And if you'd like it, send me a message and I'll send you all of that. Happy to do so. No sales pitch there. I'm creating a new course because I felt inspired to do that. And this course is going to be on communicating as a leader. And so I just want to put a plug in at the end here for anyone watching or listening after the fact. The things that we're going to focus on, first of all, are like understanding what is it to communicate like a leader, like just broad brushstrokes. How does a leader communicate? And what's the metric? And I would assert that the metric of success for a leader communicating is that their words carry impact and that they land with people over there. The leader can communicate in a way that people hear them rather than just listen to them. Most leaders settle for being listened to. If you want an example of someone who's really reliable to be listened to, listen to Ezra Klein. He is a brilliant, brilliant political commentator. He's got a lot of really intriguing things to say about like the US political climate. Quite nuanced, quite sober, quite brilliant. But dude just talks in theses, not sentences. And like, I think a lot of the brilliance he has to say gets missed. He was part of the inspiration for this. So we'll support getting clear on what that is and then really honing how to learn how to listen in a way that leaves people feeling gotten, how to speak in a way that comes across the divide and lands with people, and ultimately be much more effective as a speaker, whether it's in relation one-on-one speaking or more like broad, sort of like many to one or one to many kind of speaking, like speaking to crowds, that sort of stuff. So keep your eyes open. I'm slowly building that out. The idea just came to me last night, but I like it. And I've kind of felt like a desire to create a new course. So that's coming down the pipeline. I don't think we've got anything else for this this episode. Candida says Ezra's a bit like Zach Stein, and I don't know him. So thank you for the recommendation, Candida. I'm going to look that guy up. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, David, Candida. Who else did we have? We had Louise, Dave, Sean. Shout out Deanna. And Andrew, thank you for letting me know right at the start that I didn't have sound. So glad you got that sorted out with me. Our next call will be in 1 month's time. And I would love, 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 love feedback. If you would like a different format, if you're like, hey, I'd really like to get all of us in here so that we can do some live coaching, or if you've got a particular thing that you'd like support with, and you're like, maybe Adam would be willing to coach that, absolutely. So we can do anything like that. Any feedback that you have is invaluable and really helpful. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out and for being a part of this conversation. Because as you've probably noticed, it's not free. It doesn't just, this is a structure that supports us to stay in this ontological conversation. So thank you for supporting me, and thank you for supporting yourself, and thank you for supporting the other people in the world so that we can slowly create a deeper understanding, compassion, and appreciation for ourselves and the world. Have an amazing weekend. Bye, y'all.